Hey y'all. Okay, so today we're talking about when you crash and burn and what led up to this and what you can do about it. So, my husband is a forester and we met when we were in college and he was in the forestry program and he drove a Jeep and I thought, "Oh my gosh, this is great. Like we'll have all these outdoor adventures," which we don't really have. That's probably my fault. Um, but anyway, so it's kind of cool being married to a forester because he can explain things to me. Like when we're driving in South Georgia, he can explain why the side of the road is all black. Like, why do they burn all the forest? They don't burn all the forest, but it can look like that sometimes when you're riding through mile after mile in South Georgia. My dad used to do controlled burns. And so, what they do, as my husband explained it, and he even took me to see a documentary on longleaf pine trees. Fascinating. They purposefully light a forest on fire. And they do this so that the trees will ultimately be healthier than they were before the fire. And the reason they do this is because there are competing shrubs and competing little bushes and plants that are stealing the nutrients and potentially going to take up the sunlight too if they get taller and bigger. And, there's only so much in that space, and the pine trees really need it. And so they burn everything. And if you drive past a controlled burn when it's all over, there's smoke coming up and everything is black. But the top of the pine trees. And so the bark from a certain height on up is perfectly healthy, and the green of the pine trees at the top is fine. And so it just confused me because I was like, okay, so how does the ground not get completely burned or damage the roots? I can understand why the top of the tree is fine. The fire didn't go that high, but how come the roots are still okay? And as my husband explained it, well, it's a controlled burn. So you have to put measures in place so that the fire doesn't get out of control. You're not just going to let it go for days and days. You have to do it when the wind conditions are right. You have to, make sure that it's not a super windy day because it could jump over the fire breaks and cause a lot of damage. And the roots are down deep in the ground. They're fine. There's water down there. There's, big water reservoirs under the earth. Who knew? So this reminded me, of course, of burnout because that's where my mind is a lot of times working on this burnout book. And just like there were factors in place long before the burn started, there are factors in place that are there long before your burnout started. So think about like, what are your shrubs? What are your tiny little plants that are creating chaos, creating disorder, stealing your nutrients, like stealing your sunlight and your oxygen? And these are there for years sometimes before we finally admit it. And it's just easier, at least for me, it was just easier to go along with it. For years, I was like, I should be grateful for this job. I don't need to rock the boat. Who do I think I am coming up in here trying to change this? This practice has been here long before I started here. But you have to pay attention to all those things in your area, in your forest, or there's the potential that lightning could strike. And this is what happened back in the indigenous days before people realized they could catch forest fires on fire with just a lighter or a cigarette. But lightning would strike. And this was known to help the forest. It was like Mother Nature did it. And there is always going to be a spark that sort of sets your burnout in motion, but it started a long time before that spark. Before the office manager added an extra 5 patients to your schedule, before they told you you were going to have to go work at the satellite office, your burnout had already had the makings, it already had the ingredients. So, one of my goals is to help people take a look at their careers, take a look at their jobs before they get burned out, to kind of ask themselves like what's creating that friction, what rubs me the wrong way, when do I feel that heavy sensation, when do I feel super tense, And these are all clues that this thing needs to be addressed. You don't need to just brush it under the rug. It doesn't mean you need to march up in there and demand a change, but you need to be really aware because when you are burned out, when I talk to people, they're usually in the throes of burnout. It's like their forest is on fire. There's smoke, they're in survival mode. They really can't think clearly. We've talked about how this activates your fight or flight or flee or fawn or whatever. It activates your sympathetic nervous system when you are in the thick of burnout and you can't think logically. You can't calm down enough to make a plan. So if I can catch my clients before they get completely burned out, then we can take a look at what's going on in their jobs, what's going on in their family lives that needs to have some tweaking. And so one way to do this is to just ask yourself, when am I the most stressed? What subject or what area of my life creates the most tension in my body? I mean, it could be finances. It could be your kids. Like I've said before, we were okay when we just had one kid because there was two of us and one kid. But when we had a second kid, it just like tipped us over the edge. So pretty soon, was my biggest stressor, like parenting, co-parenting with my husband. Um, for some couples, it's just the time. There's not enough time. They don't see each other. They don't have enough time to do what they need to do. Money's, of course, a huge issue. So really take a look at all those things and think of that as like if we're in the middle of a forest fire, like all that stuff is the brush that could catch on fire. So you really need to address it ahead of time. Ask yourself, how would I rather it be? How would I rather it be? And you can do this for each area of your life. Like spiritual, how would I rather it be? Relationships, how would I rather it be? What about your health? How would you rather that be? And that's something for you to take a look at. And then ask yourself, what would that mean for my life? So if you say my health, maybe you're 20 pounds overweight, maybe you're diabetic, maybe your joints ache, maybe you have headaches like I did all the time. So, what would it mean for your life if that thing got better? Because it's a clue. It is not just there, it is a clue that something is heading towards that burn, especially physical complaints. So, take a look at whatever's going on in your life physically and see what it has to tell you. Another way that I like to ask this is, what is it that you think you haven't yet admitted to yourself that you know to be true? Now, isn't that a trick? If you're watching this on YouTube, I'm smiling because it's kind of a tricky question. Like I'm tricking your brain into answering it, even though if you saw it on paper and you had time to think about it, you'd be like, well, duh, there's nothing because if I knew it, I would have already admitted it to myself. But what have you not yet admitted to yourself that you know deep down is true? Ooh, I mean, I ask myself that sometimes, and it kind of scares me. Like, there's some things that I haven't admitted to myself that I'm like, I don't know that I want to think about that right now. So, yeah, ask yourself that. Another good one is what needs to change in order for you to have the life you say you want to have 1 year or 5 years from now? What needs to change in order for you to have the life or the health or the relationship or the career that you say you want to have next year at this time or in 5 years? Because if you have your head stuck in the sand and you're like, I mean, I don't know, I really don't want to still be driving 2 hours to work every day. I don't want to be sitting in traffic every day. I don't want to be seeing, if you work in primary care and you're seeing 20 patients a day, that can feel like a lot. And yet it goes on year after year, and you think, well, my future self will be a better PA. She'll have more experience. So she's going to, she won't be as stressed about this. She'll have like an extra 5 years of experience. She's going to be fine. I'm sure I'll get better. I'll get used to it. Maybe they'll pay me more, then that'll make it better. Like, ugh, don't you want to slap yourself sometimes and just say, look, This is something you need to admit to yourself. This needs to change. This is your life speaking to you. There was a PA who posted on a Facebook group the other day. Does anybody else feel complete dread when they look at their schedule for the next day? And of course, like tons of people were like, yes, I feel that way. This is a sign. This is the underbrush. If you feel complete dread when you look at your schedule for work, this is your life. This is your life giving you a big old sign. And if you can learn to read your body, like that dread is a huge message. So that's one thing I try to teach clients is how to read your body. And it can give you all the information you need. It can tell you what's coming down the road. It can tell you what you've ignored in the past. It sounds completely woo-woo, but it is true. All right, another powerful question I want to ask you today, if you are headed towards burnout or if you're there now, and I got this yesterday from a very wise coach because I needed to be coached yesterday. And so she asked me this question. She said, there's a saying that under every fear is a wish. Because I was telling her something I was really fearful or worried about. And so she said, well, what is the wish underneath that? And this is another example of a longing. So these uncover what your heart wants, your soul, your inner self, like your purpose. This is not just a wish like, oh, I wish I had a, new car. This is more like, what is your heart longing for? Because fear will cover that up. So if you can peek underneath fear, a lot of times it'll tell you what you wish for, which means that's what you long for, what you need, you yearn for it. And in my case, it was like I wanted to do this course that my husband was like a little bit worried about. Like, why are you doing this? Is it really like pointing you towards where you need to go? And my fear was like, maybe he doesn't support me, and that's we've talked about this. Like, we all have these old fears that come from childhood or who knows where. But whatever yours is, it may be shame, it may be like connection, it may be worthiness. That's one that I see a lot with clients. But that will come up a lot. And my therapist has taught us if it's hysterical, it's historical. And so if you get all in a tizzy and you just like fall apart and you're having this breakdown and it's just like, where did that come from? Like I was doing yesterday, a lot of times it's historical. There's something, some story that has been in your head your whole life. And, is it like, I don't matter or I'm not important? And so when she asked me that, okay, my wish is, yeah, I want to be supported. I want to feel that connection, which really it on the surface, it had nothing to do with taking that course, but it was a good reminder because in relationships, we all have stories. Everybody's got a story. And if you don't verbalize it, then it sort of festers. It's like that fire. And then it can burn everything down. So that's another example of that brush that you need to clear away and make sure it's not going to catch fire. Okay, the last thing I wanted to say was, I mentioned those control burns and how you have to put measures in place so that the fire doesn't completely get out of control. So they will dig ditches. Trying to think of some other things. I didn't do a good job researching this episode. I just kind of thought of this. But I do know I've seen my dad like with a backhoe and they've dug ditches because the fire is not as likely to jump over ditches. But this is a measure that you can put in place, and it might be seeing a therapist. Like that might be your ditch because you see that you're about to crash and burn. Maybe it is self-care. I don't love the term self-care, but yourself with a capital S is shouting at you to like pay attention. I have unmet needs. And so maybe it is care of yourself. What does the soft animal of your body need? I can't think of that exact quote, but it's what does the soft animal of your body need? I think that is what it says. It's Mary Oliver, a poem that she wrote. Anyway, so what do you need? Like really put your hand on your heart and ask yourself, like, what is it that I need in this moment? What is it that I'm going to need to prevent a complete crash and burn? And if you journal, you can ask yourself this question. You can say, what is it that I need? And like ask yourself as if you're a coach and you're asking your own self questions. And you'll be surprised what comes out on paper. If you could do it like Glennon Doyle and Elizabeth Gilbert, and they ask love, like, love, what would you have me know? Love, what would you have me do? And then they write. And it's shocking what comes out because it's like you're another person when you're answering questions that a part of you ask. I know that makes no sense. If you reach out, if you have questions about that, I will walk you through it. It's a super fun exercise. So yes, ask yourself, what is it that I am ignoring? What need do I have that I haven't been listening to? And what do I need to clear out? What is it that's creating these fire hazards in my life? Is it your schedule? Is it the daycare situation? Is it the friction you feel with the office manager, with your medical assistant who won't help you out? Like, what is it? And really just write that out on paper or find another provider and ask each other these questions. If you're in the throes of it and you're like, I can't even do this, Hope, reach out. I'll talk to you, or I'll point you in the direction of books and podcasts. And, I get it. I have been there and I wish I wish I'd had this 10 years ago because I felt like I was the only one and I didn't really know what to do. I was just gobbling up self-help books, watching old Oprah episodes, like anything that I could think of. And it's just such a lonely place to be. And it feels so desperate when you're in that burn state. My heart goes out to you. So hang in there. Please don't give up and reach out, please, if you need anything. And I will look forward to talking to y'all next week.